Welcome, everybody. My name is Mike George. I'm a reference librarian with the Torrance Public Library. And as many of you know, I am a local history buff and have some knowledge of the local area. Welcome to Alternative Torrance, a look at a maybe Torrance. I will be attempting to record this webinar so it may be played back later on the library's social media page. As you may have guessed before this started, I am not too wonderful with technology. Someone once said that while your most brilliant presentation will disappear from the internet the moment you give it, your gaffes and your mistakes will remain online forever. Let us hope that this presentation will be the former. If successful, you can view the recording and pause and write down anything that you happen to see. This is not a tutorial on how I came by finding this material. It's just a presentation of what I think a Torrance might have been according to the old newspapers. I should also say that the views expressed in this presentation are my own and do not represent the views of the Torrance Public Library, or in that fact, any other sane person. Any errors in this presentation are my own, and I apologize. They say that newspapers are the first draft of history. But for those like myself who enjoy reading the older papers, sometimes the draft of history presented is not the history we know. Newspapers, particularly the booster papers printed in the early city's existence, or more the Cows Wander Under City tabloids of the 1950s, breathlessly reported on things that were in the pipeline but never really made it out the spigot. For example, the top headline here is an example of the Torrance Herald of 1914. Not even in 1914 was Southern California air a tonic, not even in Torrance. At the time this was written, the breeze coming in from the ocean blew dust all over the place into both homes and lungs. The one below it, Cows Wander 5 Miles Through the City Drains, is an actual newspaper of about 1959. And yes, cows at that time from dairy farms around got into the storm drains around Western and wandered almost to Torrance High before they were rescued by crane. But you can see the difference between the booster and the tabloid. I would like to acknowledge some debts. Most of the information presented here comes from the old Torrance newspapers, the Herald, the Press, and the Press Herald, that were active from 1914 to 1970. Most of the events presented had wide play in the papers at the time and were seriously considered, but admittedly, some more than others. While high rises along Torrance Beach were a real possibility, dirigible hangars at the Zamperini Field was pretty much a dream of the Chamber of Commerce. You can still read much of the old newspapers by going to our website, clicking Resources, and clicking Historic Newspapers and Directories. At this point, I would also like to do a shout out to the Torrance Historical Society and the Friends of the Torrance Library, whose generous support of the digitization project allows you, the public, to read over 100 years of Torrance history. There are two ways to search for history in Torrance from our website. The upper link will get you to what I refer to as classic. This is a more text and content-based search that retains the original metadata. Or you could try the lower link. Torrance has partnered with Digilab to present another way of search. This search includes items not only from Torrance, but other local libraries, and not just the Torrance newspapers. Also, it is more graphic in that instead of a contextual your word in context, it gives you a thumbnail of newspaper. Perfect for headline searching, not too good if you're searching for a a small word in the body of the article. Aside from the newspapers, I would also like to express gratitude to a number of archives and depositories that I mine for images. While the information presented here of the whys and what fors are primarily from the Torrance newspapers, many of the photos come from depositories and archives outside our library. So I would like to thank the the USC Digital Archives, the CSU Dominguez Hills Digital Collections, the Los Angeles Public Library Photographic Collections, Sanborn Map Collection, and their ProQuest of the LA Times going all the way back to the 1880s. And the Palos Verdes Peninsula Press, available through the Palos Verdes Public Library, have been very helpful over the years to local history buffs everywhere. Also, I have used everything from the United States Geological Survey maps to the Library of Congress to the online public library over the years to research South Bay and Torrance history. Right now, I'd like to give a shout out also to whatever you do, get a Los Angeles Public Library card. It's free, lapl.org, and it's available without going in anywhere to anyone at this point in Los Angeles County. With that card, you have access to their Sanborn maps and the Los Angeles Times Historical Collection. Well worth the time to get. One of the best sources around for local history is Sam Nair's South Bay History blog. The South Bay History blog, Sam, and former librarian at the Daily Breeze, provides weekly vignettes on the history of our area, many of them with old Daily Breeze photos and articles accompanying them. I read him every week, and he is very good. I've learned a lot, everything from San Pedro to Inglewood, from Redondo Beach to Carson is featured. You may note as I go along that I don't speak much of the years between 1970 and say 1985. I call those years the lost decade. In the recent rush to digitalize materials of the 70s to the mid-80s were thought not important enough or too new to be digitized. A big shame. One of my dreams is to get the Daily Breeze digitized, as has been done and as being done with the newspapers of Torrance, Redondo Beach, and Palos Verdes. Another big shout out goes out to Leroy Jackson, former Torrance city manager and one of the most knowledgeable of local historians. Mr. Jackson recently has left some wonderful materials to the Torrance Public Library that helps cover those lost decades. Now, suppose all those wonderful things reported in the papers came true. Let us look at an average day in Torrance in the late 1970s. Please keep in mind, what I'm about to talk about never really happened. It only could have happened. So, if you have your cup of coffee and your Buick is warmed up, we will continue. So you're starting your day looking out the window of your 16th floor condo at 1 Riviera Plaza, which was built on burnt out beach where the Hollywood Riviera Club once stood. You look overlooking the Pacific, you can see Catalina, beautiful. You remember that you have to make sure a junior remembers his ball game at California State University, Torrance. Go Steelers. Now, of course, Steelers was named after chief occupation in Torrance back in the day, steelworkers. Also, Pittsburgh happened to be winning at the time. So CSU-Torrance took the Steelers as their mascot. You decide to take the monorail into your Torrance office. While the monorail goes all the way to downtown Los Angeles, you can take it just to Del Amo Financial Center right from the door of 1 Riviera Plaza. You enjoy the view from the elevated car as you zip above the traffic on congested Torrance Boulevard. You thought of taking the old Hollywood Palos Verdes Parkway in, but it is now too close to the new freeways. It is not a fast trip for the morning commute. It used to be great with wide trees, shaded drives, large setbacks, elegant homes, and even boosted walking and bridle trails. As you can see by this slide, the roadway at some points is going to be 220 feet wide. Hawthorne, around Hawthorne Torrance Boulevard, is only around 110 feet wide. So think of how wide that street would have been. The street was to be lined by elegant homes. In 1975, the parkway was not as bucolic as pictured. Many of the bridle trails and the trees have been removed to expand the road to increase traffic, and also to increase for more housing. The easements have been used to create side streets and other housing. Getting to your penthouse office in the Wells Fargo Tower at the Del Amo Financial Center, one of the three towers, the others are Union Bank, of course, and Bank of America. You look out from your beautiful view in the office. If you were on the other side of the office, you would see the ocean and the in Catalina. But those were all taken up, so you get to look at the mall and downtown Los Angeles. Your secretary reminds you that you have an appointment with Supervisor Ken Miller, supervisor of the 4th District of South Bay County, the county in which you live. The county, you reflect pride when you reflect that you helped form Torrance as the county seat of South Bay County. You're talking to Mr. Miller concerning the Torrance Field Baseball Park, which was built in the mid-30s, expanded in the 40s, and seats well over 5,000. They're currently the home of the AA Torrance Oilers, another team named after a chief occupation in the city of Torrance in bygone days. It's hoped, with an upgrading of this stadium with county funds, that it will attract a wintering team, much like the Cubs wintering in Catalina. You also talked to the Supervisor Miller about the Oilers changing their name to something, well, less industrial. The Chamber of Commerce isn't liking that. So you thought of maybe the team or Torrance Tornadoes, or having a contest to find that. Your secretary interrupts you again. Remember, this is the 70s, so it is a secretary and not an administrative assistant. Reminds you of your meeting with the Torrance Historical Society about conservation efforts of the Torrance dirigible hangars in Zamperini Field. You're not too sure of the idea of turning them into a disco. You would much prefer that the hangars remain as what they are, Goodyear blimp storage facilities and parking. You leave the meeting in time to meet with clients at a play at the Albert Eisen Performing Arts Theater, known locally as the TP. You think the TP is very cool with its revolving stages, but much to your disappointment, Grease decided to open at the Pantages rather than the teepee. Yes, a busy day. After a cocktail in the top floor restaurant of one Riviera place, seeing the view and feeling the wind reminds you of how lucky you are to live and to work in the county seat of South Bay County, Torrance, California. Believe it or not, all that, from wonderfully landscaped parkways with wide medians and expensive homes, to the bad, high rises on Rat Beach, may have been part of the Torrance landscape. So what happened? Why didn't this occur? Now we get into the real history. I love this particular photograph because it's one of the existing ones, not of Union Bank, but look up to the upper right-hand corner. You got it. One of my favorite supermarkets, Whitefront. Sovereign Development, a leader in emerging condo market, wanted to build a 22-story condo complex with penthouse restaurant, first floor shops on what is now Miramar Park or Burnt Out Beach. Imagine that. That's 22 stories. Currently, the tallest building in Torrance is Golden West Towers. That is, they decided to reduce it to 16 stories, but of course, people, and if you happen to live by the beach, you can understand that, still objected to that. That was still about 4 stories taller than the Golden West Towers. If this was to go, the Torrance Chamber of Commerce thought that there would be no end to skyscrapers in the city. Torrance and Redondo beaches could have looked like Waikiki. As a comparison, the tallest condo on the Strand currently is a 10-story Ocean Plaza, built in 1974. The Hollywood Riviera Homeowners Association successfully put pressure on the Torrance City Council to put a kibosh on the project. And now we have Miramar Park. Starting in the late 1960s, Torrance was becoming a balanced city, but was tipping towards single-family residential developers such as Don Wilson. The area where Marble Estates is now was once zoned industrial. There was a big fight to keep it zoned industrial. In came massive home builder Don Wilson, who wanted to build Marble Estates. Housing was needed in Torrance during the post-war and aerospace booms, but industrial interests and, ironically, balanced city proponents opposed large housing tracts taking industrial land. There was a court action, a flip-flop, and accusations of fraud leveled at city employee collusion. Not me, wasn't there. Well, obviously, Don Wilson won the Marble Estates fight. He didn't always get his way. One vote to rezone was 3-2 with one abstention. A councilman who arrived late, in fact didn't show up, asked to vote and voted against rezoning, making it a 3-3 vote with one abstention, killing the proposal. Then the one who abstained changed his vote in favor. This went to court. It became history. Again, it also developed a development backlash. CSU-Torrance, California State University Torrance. The story of South Bay College is a long one and worthy of more treatment than the time I have here. Evidently, after much discussion that saw the price of the original site in Palos Verdes become too expensive for the state, a site at the confluence of the 110 and 405 freeways was selected and purchased. Torrance did try hard for a school because it was felt that university would add prestige to the city. The city tried again when PV was too expensive, but again, not much hope there. By the way, as you can see by the slide, the site various sites have been considered in the city of Torrance, but one of the big contenders was Madrona, Crenshaw, and Sepulveda Carson-ish, that square where it was more interesting enough. When I was working at the California State University Dominguez Hills Archives, there were still some books stamped California State College, Palos Verdes. The Santa Fe interests and the Standard Oil interests were not too happy with the location come up with the city of Torrance. There was still oil being pumped there, and there were still train tracks running through that area. So unfortunately, there would be no California State University Torrance, nor will there be the Steelers. Pittsburgh fans are very disappointed. The monorail started off as one of those really cool ideas that a Musk tube or a Sacramento bullet train of today might entail. It was, of course, the transportation option of the future. Worked well in Disneyland. This is a wonderful picture that coming from downtown Los Angeles down the Harbor Freeway. One can only imagine what would have happened if that continued down to say where we're building the transportation hub right now. I always thought it'd be fun trying to get up and down one of those. One of the big debates, incidentally, was whether to have your monorail load, as you see in the picture, with the rail on top, or with the rail on the bottom, like they do in Disneyland. But as with many things, it was a great idea. Never really gotten a lot of consideration here in Torrance, except for a spur going around the Del Amo Financial Center, Del Amo Mall, and the Civic Center here. The Hollywood Palos Verdes Parkway was another idea that met with the hard realities of the Depression. One also wonders that if built, what it would have been like in the mid-70s with increased traffic, parking, and land values. Remember what Old Torrance looked like in the 70s? But again, like Old Torrance, what a renaissance such a boulevard might be enjoying now in 2020. Since the inception of the city, places of recreation have been proposed. There's even been a Torrance Country Club proposed not far from where Torrance High is. But most of these plans never came into being. Among the most proposed items were an auditorium and a pool. The stadium pictured above was part of a 1946 bond issue to provide, quote, much needed post-war employment, unquote, and would, it was hoped, attract a major league team for winter camp and a AAA team for Torrance. In the 30s and 40s, Torrance received a new city hall, civic center, and civil auditorium with the help of WPA grants and bond issue voted in by the citizens of Torrance. But such passage of bonds were rare in Torrance. For example, while baseball was a big deal in Torrance in the 30s and 40s, the factories had their semi-pro and industrial league teams. There was even a Torrance employee team that never seemed to get too high in the standings. In 46, the voters of Torrance were asked to float bonds for a beautiful stadium seating 5,000 and to build the recreation center you see below near Torrance Park, as well as a pool. Things were tight right after World War II, so no ballpark, no Torrance Oilers, and the pool would have to wait another 10 years and another civic center to be built. Speaking of civic centers, perhaps nothing shows what could have been in Torrance than the saga of the civic centers, both of them. The original civic center, as pictured here, city architect Irving Gill wanted to set the civic center at the end of El Prado, where Torrance High is now. A surviving LA Times article, 1912, shows a definite French-style center. The center was to cost $150,000 in 1912, which is about $4 million today, but you could do a lot more with $4 million back in the day. It was to include a library, a fire and police station, and a city auditorium. Note the formal gardens and the tower. The tower was used as both a water tank and to dry fire hoses. This is the home of John S. Cravens in South Pasadena. For you in Torrance, you recognize the name, yes, Cravens Avenue. He was an early supporter of the model industrial city. This is what his home looked like. Looks a little like the French chateau style of the Civic Center, doesn't it? Coincidence? Was Gil saying, supporter, maybe this would be a good idea? We don't know. An imagined and badly photoshopped view of what the Civic Center in Old Torrance may have looked like. Today, such a building would be a tourist mecca. Think of the chateau-style buildings in Hollywood or the fancy city halls of Beverly Hills or Torrance's own Pasadena. Can you imagine the bistro tables outside, the wood paneling? I think it would be very nice today. When the Civic Center in the mid-50s moved west, this is what they had to work with. Notice that in this 60s picture, the courthouse is being built on Maple. You can see the Benstead plunge in the left side of the picture. Madrona going up, still with railroad tracks. That's a railroad tracks spur going just north of the Jocelyn Center, now the Torrance Art Gallery. And the Ken Miller Center is still there. But everything north, no police station, no parking lot for the courthouse, and no Civic Center as we know it, Armstrong Theater, etc. Well, they had plans back in the 70s. The Civic Center, in the 60s, a full city civic center with auditorium, library, and other amenities were planned. Look at the city officials planning in this picture, undated picture. You'll notice that in order to be a planner, you have to have a black coat. No black coat or small black tie, you cannot plan cool civic centers, evidently. And notice the picture behind them on the easel. That is that picture. That is what $4 million would buy you in the 60s. Notice the center, the round, where that would be your theater. That would have had a circular stage that could rotate for scenery purposes. Below that, where the parking lot is today for the courthouse, is a round county library. There is no city hall, as you can see the gap on Torrance Boulevard to the north. There is no library, as we know it, further on Torrance Boulevard. And on the upper part, almost center, is the Benstead plunge. Notice that that is now being roofed. Also notice the beautiful landscaping and parking. There is no parking. People complain about going to a seminar here at Torrance Public Library. Think of it at this time, trying to get to see your play. This is another schematic of what they thought they'd do. The landscaping, the round library, and the central theater. More parking, however, out by the Ken Miller Center. Another idea for a round theater is this kind of cinerama dome feature with some spacey looking, hard to see fountain on the right side there. I think this would really show its date currently. This perhaps is one of the better plans, I think, and one of the more recognizable to us today. Things to look at is they've added the proposed second courthouse to the north there. We have our own library now and our own city hall built on Torrance Boulevard. There is the Ken Miller Center and the Jocelyn Center, and again the roofed Benstead plunge to the left. But the center is the beautiful part. It was proposed that instead of the parking lot we see now, to have underground parking under that, similar to Pershing Square downtown, and have the upper part as ornamental lakes, tennis courts, and landscaping. The view from my window would be tremendous. However, think of it this way. Think of the maintenance, a underground parking lot with a bunch of lush landscaping on top. The Del Amo Fashion Center was again a victim of the poor economy. When it was proposed, it was far larger than what we see now, which is about a third of it. It was going to be 20 acres and include not just office towers, but mixed-use high-rise apartments and also, quote, ultra-modern shopping facilities, which are the pavilions. Again, didn't come to be simply because there weren't as many people coming into Torrance to make it viable. In the late 20s, lighter than air transportation looked like the true alternative to the slower sea transports for long overseas routes. Imagine what a booster would thought as he saw the Graf Zeppelin fly over the city in 1928. This is a for real ad from the Herald asking people to invest in the Pacific Zeppelin Transportation Co. that would fly their 800-foot long Zeppelins from Los Angeles, or one hopes Torrance, to Hawaii. Be an interesting flight. Indeed, as this breathless 1928 message states, quote, Torrance citizens are visualizing the wealth of publicity that would be ours if the Navy Department and Congress decides to locate the great dirigible base for the Pacific Coast in Torrance. And there is a good chance that this just may happen, unquote. Well, not really. There are some aspects of the paper who suggest that the Navy were thinking about the Torrance area, which is just pretty well smack dab between San Francisco and San Diego, as a bargaining chip to get better concessions out of both those two communities. Still, as the Graf Zeppelin flew by in 1928, it is exciting to think of the Akron or the USS Los Angeles based in Torrance. But by 1975, would these hangars be derelicts? Or would the city manage to repurpose them as they did other redevelopments, such as Wilson Park or the medical park between the airport and Hawthorne Meadow Park, to make them a boon to the Torrance community? This could have been Torrance in the 70s as well. Suppose the aerospace industry all went up to Washington State, not the South Bay. What if there were no large residential developments, with homeowners that pressure the city council to slowly rid the council of derricks and pumps? Alternative Torrance could have gone the other way. Instead of the utopian alternatives I presented, Torrance could have developed into a different kind of city, one more akin to an Eastern Rust Belt city. Imagine what may have happened if Honda didn't take over major industrial sites such as here U.S. Steel, if the Madrona Marsh became either CSU, part of CSU Torrance, or another development. The green of American Honda, thank you Google Maps, looks a lot better than the factory we just saw. It is a tribute to the city that it had a redevelopment agency that was forward-thinking. With our former heavy industry, it is not too difficult to think of another alternative Torrance that looks more like Detroit than Torrance now. An alternative Torrance could just as well have been a dystopia of decaying oil equipment, deserted factories, and toxic soil. But wait, with that fun note, but wait, there's more. Many people, particularly those not on social media, don't know that there's a wealth of digital content available on our own website, the Torrance Public Library website. Just go to our website and scroll all the way down till you see those famous three icons on the bottom of the screen. Now, I'm not a fan of Facebook for a number of reasons, but it's all we have. You don't need an account to view our content on Facebook. You can still view that content. And there's a lot there. You can view everything from story times, how-to crafts, puns, book recommendations, tutorials, and even some history. This is an example of a Torrance time tunnel that represents, ooh, that's not good. Well, it's supposed to represent aspects of history, little known aspects of history in Torrance. I apologize for the hiccuping. It looks a lot better streaming straight down from the website. Yeah, Chamber of Commerce are good things. But they never really get the reality of things quite right. This happened more than once. You think flaring over at the refinery's bad. Again, that's one example of some things you may see in our website, Torrance Public Library's Facebook site. Another thing we produce is then and now pictures. It pictures of what Torrance looked like then with what it looks like now, or a near proximity. Butcher Mountain is to the left here. You can barely see it. Featuring the theater and the bird farm, for those of you with long memories. Last, that became a little something else back today. It became more housing. But there's a lot of land in Old Torrance. Well, we want to think of what could have happened. It is also important to remember that it didn't. As historians, we need to understand why things worked out as they did. I am still optimistic enough to think we can learn from the past to improve the future. Past is indeed prologue. While I don't recommend releasing houseflies in city council meetings to make a point, residents who lived too close to dairies back in the day threatened to do this if their moratorium on dairies and cows were not put into force. We still can learn how our city and its citizens made Torrance such a good place to live. Thank you for attending Alternative Torrance. I thought this presentation while I was reading the old newspapers and thinking of what might have been if what they were reporting came to pass. But it is also a cautionary tale, not to believe everything you read in said papers. Not all came to pass, and sometimes what did come to pass has disappeared. When looking at the historical record, you don't know when something will show up that will change the narrative, or at least seem to. Caveat lector. Let the reader beware and let him be critical. Thank you very much for listening to me and exploring some of the things that could have happened in Torrance.